We're live.
Thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education. We have Sue Siglowski with us from the Vermont School Boards Association. And to continue the conversation on weighting, specifically ELL categorical grants. Ms. Siglowski, thanks for being with us. We really appreciate your patience, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair Campion, and good afternoon, committee members. I'm Sue Siglowski, Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide the committee with the VSBA's position on the proposal to change the funding mechanism for English language learners from pupil weighting to categorical aid. And let you know just up front, the VSBA does not support this change. VSBA's position is based on a resolution that was passed by its members on November 4th, 2021, and the VSBA board's application of that resolution to the final report of the task force on the implementation of the pupil weighting factors report and supporting documentation, including the October 28th memorandum from Dr. Colby et al. To Representative Kornheiser and Senator Hardy, and the January 11th memo. VSBA supports implementation of the weights set out as option number 1 in the task force's final report, with the addition of the ELL weight of 2.49, and that's from Table 1, Model 4 of the October 28th memo. And I've submitted this testimony in writing.
Great. Thank you.
These weights are designed to work together within Vermont's existing education funding formula, as you know, and as you've been talking about this afternoon. There are several reasons we don't support a categorical funding program for English language learners. The first is that using a categorical grant program for ELL would require the General Assembly to calculate a new funding amount for the program each fiscal year. Second, choosing to segregate ELL funding from the rest of the formula and possibly setting the amount at less than empirical analysis says it should be, due to the need for the General Assembly to recalculate it every year, may result in discrimination against ELL students on the basis of race, national origin, or language. Third, using a categorical grant program for ELL and setting the amount at $25,335, which is translated from the weight of 2.49, would add $40 million to the top of the Ed Fund based on the number of ELL students in the state, thereby driving down the yield and increasing tax rates for all districts. And fourth, using ELL weights is more efficient and provides more predictability to districts. So that sums up our position. Rather short testimony today. I did submit it in writing and happy to answer any questions.
I appreciate that. Ms. Siglowski, just quickly, if you don't mind, greater predictability you feel in the weights rather than the categorical grants?
Yes, because the categorical grant would need to be recalculated on a yearly basis. And I understand that the weights would need to be, looked at periodically, yep, but not annually.
Not annually. Senator Lyons and Senator Persley.
Oh, I'm good.
Oh, you're good. Senator Persley.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Sue, why do you think that the categorical grant would have to be calculated annually?
That is information from Professor Colby's memos that she has submitted to the task force.
Okay, I'll have to go back and look at the memos. I don't remember saying annually, but just regularly as with the weights, because I think it could be similar to the way we do transportation or special education today. Those are reimbursement, but you could just, you could do a reimbursement up to a certain dollar amount. There's ways to get around the objections, I think. Thanks. I'll look at the memos again.
Okay, Senator Lyons.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, perhaps we could get those memos on our webpage. I know they're included with the report, but we keep hearing reference to those, and it might be helpful to separate them out and have them from Dr. Colby.
Yeah, I'll ask Daphne later today. Daphne and I can talk about also sending them around to everybody so that they have them.
And just another comment, I always
Yes.
agree with Senator Perchlik because he's so really sensible,
Uh-huh.
but
Continue. Yeah.
you never say but, remember that? I'm just concerned that it's difficult for me to equate transportation with ELL support services and what kids need. That's a tough one for me.
Sure. No, sure. Yeah. Senator Hooker.
So, thank you, and thank you, Ms. Sokolowski, for pointing out the $40 million on top of the ed fund that would drive down the yield and increase tax rates for all the districts. I guess what I would like to see is, how are these grants, if we go with 25,000 per student, how is that going to affect all of the other districts as well? So I don't know if we can get, those kinds of numbers. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
What's
Sure.
how is the tax rate going to be affected by the grant as opposed to by the weights? Because I would expect it's going to be affected either way. So
I see Mr. James just popped up, but Ms. Sokolowski, if you want to respond first, or if you want to punt it, that's completely acceptable as well.
Yeah, I was basically going to punt it and say that it would need to be modeled, and I'm sure Mr. James might have some interesting information for you.
I was trying to find the raise my hand button, but I couldn't find it, so I turned my camera on. If you were to go with the categorical grant, it would be off the top of the ed fund. However, that would also be reducing education spending across the state. If we kept, keeping all things equal right now, because otherwise we're guessing what people are going to do. If the categorical grant is $40 million, then that money is already in people's budgets right now. And so the big line on the education fund is the adjusted education payment. And that would go down. So it would basically neutral, just come off in a different place. It would affect people's tax rates more than anything else by lowering them. Again, the yield would need to go up to bring it back to roughly where they were. But I don't think, and again, I haven't modeled it out, I don't think there'd be a significant difference because the cost is already there. What you're doing is you're taking the cost from one pot and moving it to another line on the ed fund.
Okay. Very helpful. Any final questions for Ms. Sokolowski? I know we're going to see you, I think, tomorrow and Tuesday on different topics, and we can always jump in if we have any additional questions about this. Senator Perchlik. You're muted, Senator.
Sorry.
No
I would
problem.
want to know if the school boards, if that difference there, like if it mattered to their position, whether either way we do it, weights or grants, if it affects the taxes the same, if that affects their position at all. And if it does, if they're saying that the grants kind of like automatically get us to the 25,000 per student, but the weights don't, but yet they want us to use the empirical data, are they saying that that the school should not spend 25,000 per student? It just seems to be a contrary position to say, we want you to do what the study says. The study says 25,000, but if you do 25,000, that'll be too much and taxes would go up. But if you did the weights, you would want the schools to spend the $25,000 because that's what the empirical evidence says should be spent on each child that's learning English to give them the same outcomes. So I don't know, it strikes me a little bit as having your cake and eating it too, but maybe I'm just not understanding the position.
So I'm definitely saying that the VSBA supports spending the correct amount for English language learners. Want to make sure that that is clear, and school boards budget for the needs of those students in their districts, including English language learners. And actually, as you heard earlier today, federal law requires them to serve those students. So if there's a concern about making sure that the needs of English language learners are met, we believe that it shouldn't be addressed by singling out one group for a change to the funding mechanism that needs to be recalculated every year. It's definitely a high priority to ensure that the needs of these students are fully funded, and it shouldn't be dependent on a mechanism that is subject to, having to be recalculated every year, and possibly subject also to political will. So that's basically our point on that question.
Mainly my point was on your point about the tax rate increase. That's what I heard. I thought one of your problems with it was that it was going to increase property taxes. Did I miss that?
That is a concern that we just wanted to point out as a possible effect. Not to advocate for not spending that money, but just as a possible effect of taking that type of an approach.
Okay. Mr. Glowski, unless you have a final comment, I think we'll leave it there.
I do not have a final comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great to see you. S249 is in our committee, and it's been authored, I guess, by Senator Nica, as well as I'm sure the actual writing, no offense to Senator Nica, was Ms. St. James, but the idea itself came from Senator Nica. And Senator Nica, it's, dare I say, a thrill to have you down here in Senate Education, and looking forward to understanding a little bit about 249. And we have Ms. St. James here to take us through the bill, but we thought we'd start with you.
Great. So thank you for inviting me in. This is an issue that I've been interested in for a number of years, have put this similar bill in several years ago, a couple of times. And I believe some time ago it passed the Senate, but it didn't go anyplace in the House.
Okay.
I've been working in social services with children for my whole career. I worked at the Vermont Occupational Training Center. I worked for the state of Vermont, and I worked for Eckert Youth Alternatives. And in the course of that, I met many, many children, young people, especially teens, who could have accomplished a great deal more in life had they had more education. Many of these young people didn't have great success in school. And when things didn't go well at school and they were 16 or older, they left the school system. Many of the parents of the foster parents of these children wanted them to continue, but the child didn't have to. So indeed, they didn't. It may have been small things that triggered them getting out. It may have been sick and tired of sitting in a classroom where they didn't fit in, couldn't do the work. A lot of really sad cases. And I think, they had no job prospects. Of course, now it would be a little different with the pandemic. There are all kinds of jobs available if someone has the wherewithal to do them. And I see, so the situation is a little bit different now. Still, many, let's see, I'd like to say that, let's see, schools in the past, if these children, some of these children were what schools consider a pain in the neck, because of the challenges that they present. Oh, Senator Lyons says she was. Well, I mean, it is true that in some cases, schools were unfortunately glad to have them out because they were, frequently and regularly creating difficulties in school. That's really why I was involved with a lot of them. And some schools were great about getting them into alternative programs, some districts better than others. Certainly, some of these kids did great in the alternative programs. The staff were very committed to them. But some of these young people wouldn't even participate in the alternative programs because they were old enough to be out of school. Schools through the years have had the physical space to accommodate them. Right now, of course, we know that our technical schools are looking for students. Maybe they, at that point they weren't so they weren't needing these students as much as they are now. And there are also great technical programs now that many of these young people would fit into. And they also have more supports there. So anyway, I really feel that these people are a resource as our future workers. And many of them mature if they have a little more time in school and can cooperate more with, showing up. Showing up, being reliable, not getting in fights with their fellow students, all those kinds of things that happened before. And many years ago, many of them, of these young people would have joined the armed services, even though several years ago at least 10, maybe more than that no longer became an option for these students because they didn't have a high school diploma and they couldn't get in, or even sometimes they couldn't get in even with the GED. But that, of course, that's not what's going on today. The dates in this bill are staggered to not put a big burden on the schools. And also the date to start this is moved out to 2023 because, of course, this year and for couple of years now, the schools have been absolutely overwhelmed with all that they're having to deal with. And I don't think a new program would really meet, it really isn't appropriate to do it right now, but certainly by 2023, it would be, and then it would be staggered in, the half-year increments to not put too heavy a burden on them, which is what some persons have said in the past. So I think the schedule of when it would take place would be, suitable to do. And these children are out there. A lot of times they would be out of school. They would certainly be out on the streets. Good chance to start some drug use while you're out there on the streets, getting in with the wrong people. So I think that I'd really love it if we would have the guts to say you have to stay in school until you're 18. And quite frankly, many of their parents would love it too. So I think New Hampshire did it quite a few years ago now, bit the bullet and did it. And, the numbers, we have had good school attendance for students completing high school. In terms of we're above 90%, but I don't know what it is now since the pandemic because some kids have, they were at home and then they just never went back to school or never rejoined the virtual. So some of them are missing now, but they, it's been much harder now. So I don't know really what our percentage is of those who are completing school now. The education department might well know these numbers, although I don't know if they've had a chance to address those issues with all that they've got going on. So anyway, that was where I am with this bill and why I'd love to have the age moved up.
Yeah, thank you for that. And before we hear from Senator Chittenden, I just wanted to let colleagues know Senator Nika comes from a long family, truly, of committed individuals to adolescence. Her dad started a Little League program, a really, really incredible Little League program for young people. I used to go and watch my siblings there and frequent the concession stand. But really, it's similar to what you're talking about. It's an activity. It's something. It really gave young people something to do, and it's so important, and it's a great legacy. Senator Chittenden.
Senator Nika, I was very intrigued by your bill, and I did send you a short note. I would wonder if you have any thoughts on the topic of kindergarten entrance age in relation to this bill. I support your bill from everything I've heard so far. Of course, I'd love to hear testimony from the superintendents and so on to know what their thoughts and concerns would be. But in your discussions with this in previous bienniums, has I hope, I'm sure you're probably aware that Vermont allows local education districts to choose an entrance age for kindergarten to fall sometime between a 4-month period. A lot of other states have a more consistently set threshold. And in my summation, that means that that is allowing some districts to put additional pressures on our childcare system, which there's not enough of, but it's also, to your point, it's delaying when students get to enter the childcare or the schooling system, which is also exasperating for some of these kids, keeping them or in senior year as an older age. Has that come up in any of your discussions about when we in Vermont require or allow students consistently across the whole state to enter kindergarten?
Yes, it certainly has. And for years, even in my own personal family, I have always thought, I mean, I know why schools set a certain date, which you have to be, I guess, 5 years old by. Mandatory school age is 6 to 16. But allowing children to enter school earlier would certainly be something I support. I always have, although, and I have 2 children. One was both born in January. One entered at the allowed age of, she turned 5 in January, entered in the fall. The other one entered at age 4. My school district allowed it. Child seemed to be ready to do it. Everything worked out fine. And I've heard from other people, of course, it's a little bit different now than when they went, because now there is a good pre-K program, whereas then there was not. I think allowing them, obviously there has to be some measure of whether they're ready to go into kindergarten. And I think sometimes that can be, maybe some people with influence get in, maybe some don't. I think, though, that I think it's certainly something we should be looking at. Because you're right, here's an opportunity. I mean, I have a 5-year-old grandson now. He's a little bit of a, he's challenging, I'd say, but he's in kindergarten, and I can't believe what he's learning. I mean, doing math, doing STEM, reading, which he seemed, he's like a jitterbug. And I was really worried about how he'd do in school, but here he is doing fine and learning a lot, much more than I expected. Shouldn't say that in front of my daughter either, but.
Yeah. Well, this is videotaped now, so she can listen to it at any time. Senator Chittenden.
Quick follow-up. So Senator Nitka, prior to the session beginning, I did work with Elizabeth St. James on drafting a very short little bill on asking the Agency of Education to just give us a report a year from now on what our school districts are choosing to, when they are setting those dates, just to inform future decision-making around how that might be putting additional pressures. If that language were to instead be added to this bill, does that cause you any concern if we just bundle it all together if this moves forward?
I think that's up to your committee to do, and I certainly wouldn't object to it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Senator Nitka before we have a walkthrough of the bill? Ms. St. James, sorry, Senator Lyons.
I don't know if it's a question for Senator Nitka or not, but thank you for bringing this in and your perspective on this. The proof, I think, in the whole early education programs and what you're talking about for your grandson will be what happens when they get to be 16 years old, and whether they actually the outcomes.
Right.
But in the meantime, what you're talking about seems quite important. Are you familiar with the Department of Labor program for and counseling kids who are currently on their way out of school to help them get jobs and employment?
Well, in appropriations, of course, we're putting money into a lot.
Yeah,
of
that's true.
programs.
The whole Weber program.
All of those programs.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
the Youth Conservation Corps, where we've put money in.
Right, VYCC.
Yep.
But so
Those are great programs, and I
Yeah.
could see that this bill might need a little modification in order for those programs to qualify as part of, a high school diploma. But I certainly think that those are the kinds of things that can work for many of these students.
yes, I know when we talked about the personal learning plan legislation a few years ago, this was also part of the conversation and how to keep these kids in school. So expanding that, the conversation to the current programs makes a lot of sense. And then keeping them there. It's good.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So I apologize, but I need to go back to appropriations because we're having a problem with not having a quorum. So
Ah,
I'd like to stay and listen to more, but
so we appreciate you coming coming down, talking to us, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, Senator Nika.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very much.
Ms. St. James.
Too.
Good afternoon, Beth St. James, Legislative Council.
I get
As
the
you-
sense, Ms. St. James, that we are going to try to transition to our iPads to follow things. So I believe the bill is, I believe Daphne has it on today's calendar. And everybody would just mind pulling it up. Let's see. As introduced. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So as Senator Nitka mentioned, this bill proposes to increase the mandatory age of school attendance to 18 years old, but in half-year increments. So it's not just a jump. Current law is the mandatory school age of attendance is between the ages of 6 and 16. This bill proposes to raise that ceiling to 18, but it doesn't jump directly from 16 to 18. So Section 1 amends Title 16, Section 1121, which is the attendance by children of school age. And you can see here that what it's doing is on line 15 of page 1, a child, instead of between the ages of 6 and 16 years, this bill would amend it to read between a child of between 6 years of age and 16 years, 183 days, so 16 and a half. So, and then there are some, it would take the, on page 2, line 1, it would take the exception for having completed, current state law is completed 10th grade. This bill would amend that to 12th grade. And then is excused by the superintendent or a majority of the school directors, or is enrolled in a post-secondary school. Those are current law exceptions to the requirement that the child be in school. And then there's an addition of, and I heard the discussion about the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps and Department of Labor programs. This might be an area where the committee wants to think about adding more specifics, but an exception for students. This bill would insert an exception for students who are enrolled in or attending or completed a secondary career in technical education, a comprehensive high school program, or a student apprenticeship program. So trying to capture the fact that not everyone is in the traditional public school path. And then you'll see that Section 2 is amending the same statute. And what this is doing is it's the only change it's making is another 6 months. So bumping that age up from between 6 and 16 and a half to 6 and 17. We've already amended and added, changed the grade level exception to 12th grade and added those exceptions for students who are not in the traditional public school path. So you don't need to amend that again, so they don't appear again. Section 3 on page 3, line 1, again, amending the same statute, Title 16, Section 1121, another 6 months. So bumping the school year or the age from 6 to 17 to 6 and 17 and a half. And then finally, Section 4, line 9, page 3, we've hit 18 years of age. So it's a several year bump in 6 month increments to get to 18. There are related provisions in the attendance and discipline chapter, which is what these sections fall in Title 16, that are related to this concept, and those have also been amended in this bill. So their title section 1122, the bottom of page 3, lines 19 and 20 are the, do you have a question? I'm sorry, does someone have a question? I saw a yellow box light up. This is for currently in state law, if a student is 16 or over and they are enrolled in public school, this statute says they got to stay in public school. And so this statute is amended to reflect the fact that this bill is raising the minimum or the highest level at which attendance can be compelled from 16 to 18. And rather than do that in half-year increments, all it does is refer the reader back to title or section 1121. So whatever half-year increment we're on, or if we've hit 18, that's what would be in current law, and that's what the reader would be referred back to. So a person having control of a child, instead of over 16 years of age, it would be who exceeds the maximum age set forth in 1121 of this title. Is that concept clear? Okay. Going on, still on page 4, line 11 is section 6 of your bill. It is failure to attend. So what happens if a student is not attending? Again, this statute currently refers to the ages of 6, between a student between the ages of 6 and 16. That's the compulsory age group that attendance is required. And so now, because we're bumping that up in half-year increments, we're just referring the reader to the age limit statute in 1121. So a student between the ages set forth in section 1121 of this title who is not excused or exempted from school attendance, fails to enter school at the beginning of the academic year, or being enrolled fails to attend school, and when a student who exceeds the maximum age set forth in 1121 of this title becomes enrolled in a public school, the teacher or principal shall notify the truant officer. And then the next, the only other section to be amended, we're at the very bottom of page 4, line 21, section 7, jumps right to page 5, line 1. Section 1128A of Title 16. Again, there's a reference to the 6 to 16 year age gap. So we're referring everyone back to that same section that's been amended. The superintendent may and the truant officer shall stop a child between the ages set forth in section 1121 of this title, or a child who exceeds the maximum age set forth in this title, and take the child to school. The effective date section on page 5, starts on line 8, it's section 8 of the bill. So section 1, which is amending the first half year bump to 16.5, that would not take effect until July 1, 2023. And then it's 1 year increments. So then the next 6-month bump would take effect on July 1, 2024. The next 6 months on July 1, 2025, and the following 6 months on July 1, 2026. And then the effective date section itself, so section 8 and sections 5 through 7, this bill contemplates them taking effect this year on July 1. They're not changing the sections 5 through 7 are not changing the age. They're just taking out the specific ages and referring the reader back to the section that references the ages. So it's not really a change in the age reference. So the bill currently contemplates an effective date of July 1, 2022, but that could certainly be changed to be consistent with the first bump if that's easier to follow.
Senator Chittenden.
So I'm understanding from this that it's not an age as of like an enrollment date. It's really just their age. So if the student turns 18 in January of their senior year, even when we finally get to the section 4 being in effect, if that student really just doesn't want to be there, they can just walk out the door and not be at school. Is that correct?
No, so if you look at section 5, so students who exceed the established school age. So if you are, so currently, I'm going to use the current law. So 16 is the current age.
Yep.
If you're 16 and you're enrolled in school, this section says you got to stay in school.
Okay.
So it would be the same for 18.
If I may, Chair.
Please, yeah.
So with that understanding, thank you. I did read this, but I still don't quite speak lawyer. I'm working on it. I would love to have the committee at another discussion, if the chair would permit, to consider the language around kindergarten entrance age, because I really do think that factors into this. And there is some more information that I think a future education committee should really consider as to how that's being rolled out differently in different communities around the state. And that is abnormal from other peer states. I don't know what to do with that, Chair, but I'd love to at some point bring into this conversation that language that I passed you via email.
Yeah, we'll put it on the agenda for next week. Take a look at the language and then have a couple people in to see if this, if that, you know, the connection here, and see if that's something we can gain support for. I also personally think Senator Nicka's bill is a good one, and we'll line up and, you know, unless I hear major objection, we'll line up testimony for that as well. Senator Hooker.
Thank you. I know, and this may be totally off base, but I know that there are a lot of kids who graduate at 17. And I'm wondering how that's going to be taken into consideration. I mean, not too many of them are graduating at 16, I don't think, but there are those. And I just wonder how that would be taken into consideration as we implement this increase.
So if I may,
Please.
I don't know if that was directed at me. So if we go all the way back up to section 1, on page 1, line 14, technically section 1 starts on line 13, but the statute starts on line 14. So we're looking at the language. So this is the attendance by children of school age required, which is a very awkwardly worded title of the section. So a person having control, I'm just going to go through it slightly painfully because I think it will help. A person having the control of a child currently, so current state law is between the ages of 6 years of age and 16, shall cause the child to attend a public school, an approved or recognized independent school, or an approved education program or home study for the full number of days for which that school is held, unless the child, the first exception is mentally or physically unable to attend. And then the second exception on page 2, line 1, current state law has it as completed 10th grade. So this bill bumps that up to 12th grade. It doesn't say that you have a high school diploma. I think that that's probably implied, but that is certainly some language that the committee could consider amending that to make it more clear if that's the committee's intent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. It makes it clear. Thanks.
Welcome.
Senator Lyons.
So yes, I have a related question that obviously the goal is to keep children in school until they've completed a diploma and then graduate. And I don't know how we deal with some of the contemporary things we're seeing where kids are entrepreneurs and moving out and inventing technologies that then keep them self-employed. So there's nothing here about employment and self-sufficiency. So, and I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think everyone, of course, should have the degree. But there are some current trends that I know, think about some kid who's really talented in music and playing the guitar and goes out and tours the country. So I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to deal with those kids. That's all. It's an exception to the rule.
Sure. Senator Terenzini.
Well, Senator Lyons, hold on one second. Thought my Alexa was going to say something. Senator Lyons just made me think of something. I mean, is there any language right now in state law around education that, say, a student completed all 4 years of their curriculum in 3 or in 2 or 2.5? I mean, is there a mechanism now in place where you could graduate at 16 and a half because you worked very hard and completed it in 2.5 years versus 4?
Yeah, so I think, no. So current state law, you're required to be in school if you're between the ages of 6 or 16. And then there's an exception if you've completed 10th grade. So this bill amends that to have completed 12th grade. And that's an exception to being required to be in school in that age range. So if you are Doogie Howser and you complete high school at whatever time, I think I just dated myself there, and you completed school, within, I think he was 13 or 14, right? Then you've met that exception because you've completed 12th grade, but you're still in that age range that's required to be in school. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Senator Perchlik.
Can we call that the Doogie Howser exemption?
We
Well,
certainly could.
Yeah, we could do that. He'll be in next week to weigh in on this, I think. Pretty much set that appointment a couple weeks ago. Anything else at this point? This has been very helpful, very thorough, good questions, a lot there. We'll dig into it a little bit more. We'll hear more about Ms. St. James, if you don't mind scheduling with Daphne time to come in to talk about Senator Chittenden's language, and then it'd probably be the following week, because I know we're looking pretty packed already for next week for coming back to this, but we'll see. But it would be great to jump in and have a review of the kindergarten language next week. Okay. Anything else at this point? Senator Hooker.
I'd like to get some numbers from AOE, and maybe that's something we can ask for them to have, as far as, how many kids do drop out, how many.
Yeah.
We have a good graduation rate, but I'm looking at, how many kids are there in the state that are leaving at 16?
I'm making a note now, so I'll ask AOE to come in with some of those kinds of numbers and other data. I was just curious, the number of states. It looks like 13 states in the District of Columbia require students to wait to be 18. And then there are another 9 states that say you have to wait to be 17. But some of the other stuff is, I think, much more compelling that you're asking for, Senator Hooker, and more important. So I'll dig into that and ask them to do as well. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for a good afternoon. And stay well. Hope you can get out and enjoy the sunshine a little bit. Thanks so much, Ms. St. James.